I'm looking at my notes here to see if I have any good pre-show topics. You know, a little bit of warm-up, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of that 27 mil pancake lens?
Oh, yeah. I don't know yet. I think that it's small.
It is small.
And I think that it focuses quickly. And I think that 27 millimeters is a decent focal length.
Those are all true.
Yep. It's smack in the middle between 35 and 23.
Mm-hmm. Which are, well, you don't have both of those size lenses.
I have owned a 35 and a 30 and a 23.
Mm-hmm. But now you do not own either of those.
I wasn't a huge fan of 30.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It just didn't seem right.
I still have that 30 that I bought because it was so cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly all I use it for is an A angle for interviews.
Right. Well, you have to.
Yeah.
Because I demand primes.
The last time we shot an interview, I used the 1770.
That's true. That kind of made sense for that one.
Yeah.
We needed a deeper depth of field anyway.
Mm-hmm. I don't think you should use the 27 to shoot an interview, though. Probably not the right lens.
Well, why not?
Too small.
It's just because you think that they would judge you for how tiny your A-roll lens is?
Yeah, you'd look like a filthy casual.
He comes showing up with this little pancake lens and you're like focusing it manually.
Yeah, it'd be like shooting an interview on an X106. Like just be weird. Not that you couldn't do it. Just be weird.
I mean, would it be more or less socially acceptable, in scare quotes here, to shoot that interview with a pancake lens or with an iPhone?
I figured that's what you're going to ask. And I honestly feel like it's more acceptable to use the iPhone because then it comes across as like, you know, you're just doing like a quick thing or a social media thing or whatever. But if you're bringing a real camera, it's like, why didn't you just bring a bigger real camera?
That sounds judgmental. Do you think other people out there are as judgy about camera gear as camera people are about camera gear? Or do you think the camera people are less judgy about camera gear?
It depends on which direction you're talking, because I do think that if you show up with like a rigged out camera and a matte box and stuff, people who don't know anything about cameras take you way more seriously.
That is true. But don't like camera people also take you more seriously?
Maybe. I don't know. It depends, because they might also just look at it and think, you know, like you're just, you know, if you know cameras, you can look at somebody's camera rig and understand whether it's like really functional or just this person's just getting into cameras and they got on Small Rig's website and went crazy.
What would be an example of something that you would put on your camera rig that would be mostly for show and that would not be functional?
Well, I think a matte box is that in a lot of cases, although of course there are legitimate uses for a matte box. But I think that people sometimes use that as that item.
Okay.
What do you think? What do you have in mind?
I'm trying to think. I mean, obviously, like sometimes you put bells or whistles on there.
Mm-hmm.
Battery plates tend to be functional, but usually you're just connecting those to USB-C, and then you have just like multiple batteries. Maybe like a left hand handle.
Yeah, that's probably one of the lesser useful things for sure.
Because I mean, usually you're gonna put your hand on the lens, right? Mm-hmm. And then you got your right hand on whatever handle, top handle, bottom handle, whatever.
Yeah. Talking about a like normal mirrorless camera.
I mean, I think regardless.
You think regardless?
I think the left handle is for show.
Interesting.
Unless you're using like one of those, what are those gimbal things? The like mobile gimbals, whether it's like a giant sphere.
Like a Mobi Pro or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. There you go.
That one has two handles and it's acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only time it's acceptable to have a left handle.
I think another interesting like red flag, I guess, is if somebody has a monitor mounted on their camera, but they don't have a cage. That makes me feel like, or you know, any number of accessories really, but I feel like specifically something big like a monitor. I feel like if you just like throw that in the hot shoe mount and you don't have a cage on your camera, it makes me feel like you don't have your priorities right.
Which is worse, mounting a monitor to the hot shoe, mounting a top handle to the hot shoe, or mounting one of those magic arms to the hot shoe to hang the camera?
The monitor is by far the best out of those three options. I think I'd have to go top handle. That bothers me every time I see it. I don't think they should even make that product.
So you would say the top handle to the hot shoe is worse than magic arm to hot shoe holding your camera up for like an overhead angle.
Well, the reason I feel that way is because at least with the magic arm thing, now when you say an overhead angle, that's particularly bad because sometimes those hot shoes are set up where it could just slip right off.
Sure.
You know? But ignoring that, I feel like at least with the magic arm, it's not a dynamic load. You know, like you're probably going to put the camera there and it's just going to be there. With the top handle, I mean, you're swinging that thing around like crazy. There's no telling what you're doing with that camera, and it could just fall right off.
I think if you go with the magic arm route and you use that for like recording your car YouTube videos, like clamp it to the rearview mirror.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Just like hang your like whatever Canon like 70D off the hot shoe.
Yeah,
that'd be perfect.
That's the best that 2011 had to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Small rig did a great thing by making cages actually affordable.
Yeah, that's probably.
Yeah, maybe it just gave us more rope to hang ourselves with. Who knows? Welcome back to the Camera Gear Podcast. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Lucas.
And we're here today to talk about the gear, software, and techniques we use to shoot photos and video.
Google really needs to update their apps to support stage managing.
Yeah, that's been a problem.
There's so many stages that need managing, and when Google Docs or equivalent is just not having it, it's really annoying.
I mean, at this point, we're just lucky Google hasn't canceled Google Drive yet. They seem to cancel every other service that people like. So
I'm sure it's coming. You just give it a minute. This time next week.
Yep.
No more Google Drive.
Maybe so.
All right. So last time we met here in this place, not at this time, it was a different time.
Yeah.
Time before time. We were gonna talk about Sony.
Well, and we did a little bit.
And then you were just like, blah, 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 camera. And then it was like an hour and a half later, and we didn't even get to Sony.
That's exactly what happened.
So I'm putting my foot down here, Daniel, and we're not, there's nothing beforehand. There's no like pre-topics. We're going straight into main topic here.
Man, those Sonybros have it pretty good. They don't even have to sit through all of our drivel for 20 minutes before getting to the main thing. We're just going right into it.
I mean, I'm sure that they'll have listened to every episode up to this point.
Good point.
Really for the context.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's basically mandatory.
That's true. That's true. All right. So what do you want to talk about with regards to Sony?
I feel like for Sony, no matter how much digging and reminding myself of their product lines and like collection of information to then just jabber on about them, I feel like I can't collect enough information. It just feels like there's
a lot of cameras out there.
There's like so much Sony, and it feels like everyone really cares about what Sony's doing.
Yeah,
because it's Sony.
I mean, as we record this, they released a new lens today.
Yeah, they did.
Like
that full frame, their lightest full frame ultra wide zoom,
and it feels like every week they release something new.
They're always releasing cameras. They own a huge portion of the sensor fabrications for cameras, for your cell phone, and for mirrorless cameras.
They sell to a bunch of the other camera manufacturers.
Right, exactly. And from what I understand, like their fab department and like their mirrorless camera development department are basically separate companies and fairly well, separated from each other.
Yeah.
And something along like the lines of how complex fabricating. I mean, fabricating a camera sensor is like building an SoC, right? It's silicon wafers and all this whole thing, but it's so much bigger. Like the size of like a chip, in a computer, is significantly smaller than the size of a full frame sensor.
Sure.
And so it's like building an ARM processor, but even more so kind of situation. And so like the number of fabs that have the ability and the capacity and the skill to make these sensors is fairly minor. And it feels like they're concentrated in like two companies. I know that like Toshiba and maybe a few other ones still make sensors for things like security cameras and other industrial applications, but basically anyone who's not Canon is buying a Sony
Yeah.
sensor for their camera images?
It's expensive to build out that capacity, and I'm sure for a lot of these companies, especially with, cameras like we talk about, I think have, lost some ground to smartphones, for example. And just given that and given how expensive it is to build out, I think it's just easier for a lot of these companies to just buy sensors from Sony rather than making them themselves. And Sony's happy to sell them sensors because that's, obviously hugely profitable for them.
What is your relation/opinion on Sony, just like as a brand, or just kind of your feeling about Sony?
Oh, that's a broad question. They make everything, right?
They do.
They make tons and tons of stuff.
Well, I just ask, like, when we talked about Nikon, I feel like I had like a deep emotional connection to Nikon because of how I grew up. And I'm just wondering if, like, do you have like some predisposition to Sony?
In general, I think I like what they do. They're very well known for electronics. Everybody knows what a Sony Walkman is. Well, maybe not anymore, but people in our generation and
People
before
used to know what a Sony Walkman is.
Yep. And PlayStation and all that. I guess I've always had a generally positive impression of them, but my impression, which kind of carries through the camera stuff, has been that they have really good technology, but not a whole lot of like personality, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I feel that way about their camera stuff too.
I could see that. It seems to me like Sony has always seen themselves as a company that, like, they're making very premium and premier products.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what were they, Vios, the laptops?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Their computer brand. Those were really expensive.
Mm-hmm. And back in the day, they were kind of like, just the design and stuff looked more premium, and
right.
They definitely positioned it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of how they see themselves, as they make these premier products. Their cell phones are like that. You go try to buy an Xperia cell phone or smartphone. Ooh, I sound like I'm 1,000 years old. You're gonna buy one of them cell phones. Oh, flip it open. They're one of the only phones out there that has a 4K display.
Yeah, but they're so expensive.
They're so expensive, and like they're really cool, really good phones, really well built. But they just, like, it's like, I don't know who's, I guess in America, like, who's buying these things.
Yeah, you never see those, like, when you're walking around.
Right, but it's like they see themselves as like making these premier products.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much they would like liken themselves to a company like Apple that has this, cachet, is that the right word? Like this image around them.
But I wouldn't say they only make premium products. They have premium lines, but you see plenty of affordable Sony. You want to get like speakers or headphones or whatever. There's plenty of affordable things out there.
Yeah, well,
which is kind of unlike Apple.
That's true. But I guess as an electronics company, if I see the name Sony on something, like, it's probably decent.
Yeah, they're definitely higher end, like TVs and stuff.
Yeah, like I trust that they're not going to have any basic electronic problems. That everything's going to be good with it.
Sure.
I do think it's really interesting how they have, like, being that they are like the sensor fab, whatever, how they have exploded into the camera market in the last decade.
Yeah.
Prior to what was like mid 2000s, there wasn't really like Sony cameras. They bought Minolta, and then they basically like blew up into the digital mirrorless market.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are no DSLR Sonys.
I think they did point and shoots.
Yes, they did make point and shoots.
But yeah, they weren't in like the pro market.
Right. And it seemed like they decided to enter the landscape, and like, we're just going to compete on like tech specs and hybrid video, and here we go. And they are like the second most dominant player, and they're just pushing so hard against Canon to take over that market. And I find it just terribly interesting. And I guess I wonder, like, what is the primary appeal? Why is Sony have so much clout in the camera market when they don't necessarily have the history and the tradition that a lot of these camera companies do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it is, they do have strong technical chops. Like you said, they make quality products, and we've seen that their cameras are typically pushing the limits of what's possible in terms of resolution or frame rate or whatever. It seems like they often have kind of pushed those limits. I think it's that, and I think they also have a lot of money to throw at it in terms of R&D and marketing. And I mean, it just seems like they have a lot of funding, in that industry, and I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, I think that the marketing makes a huge difference, and they're able to, leverage their position to kind of get their brand out in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
I do you think that it's their visibility as, a lot of these like brand ambassadors using Sony because they the video features are really good, so like now it's just kind of in front of a lot of people? Or do you think it's the tech? Or do you think it's like the autofocus? What do you think is kind of like the big thing that really has pulled Sony forward in the industry?
That's a hard question to answer. I do think they were pretty early to the autofocus game in terms of having good video autofocus, which, was coincided well with YouTube exploding in popularity. I think that did help them out. They don't have as much of a lead on it as they used to, but for a while it seemed like everybody was saying like, you've either got to have Canon or Sony autofocus and nothing else is worth using. But I mean, I guess I feel like it's just kind of generally that they have that technological advantage because, we could say it's the marketing, but I think that people wouldn't have wanted to they wouldn't have gotten these influencers to use their cameras if their cameras weren't, actually decent, at video. And so I think that they have capitalized on their success well through marketing. But I mean, I think it's mostly just that they did create a really good product.
Yeah, I guess I probably tend to agree. It seemed like, especially whenever, I was getting more and more into cameras, and I guess I didn't have a lot of attention towards Sony in the, say, like 2009 to, I don't know, 2017 timeframe.
Mm-hmm.
That like early Sony decade, whenever they were like starting to explode. I think that, obviously like the A7R2 and the A7S and say A7S2 were pretty monumental cameras for them.
Yeah, but the A7S2 I feel like was like a legendary camera. If we had a legendary camera series like our legendary lens series, A7S2 would have to be in there.
Oh, certainly. Just the low light capability kind of exploded, and it was look at these amazing things that you can do out of a mirrorless body, and look at this super awesome low light performance. And they are always like that's where they're pushing the edge, right? The current FX3 A7S3, even still 12,800, that gain ISO on that 12 megapixel sensor is one of the cleanest sensors at that resolution in any video camera right now. It's totally nuts.
And that's not a new camera by any means.
No. And the 63 megapixels in the A7R5 is the highest megapixels you're going to get. So it's...
Well, and you got the global shutter and the A9 Mark III.
Yeah, and that's also a one-of-a-kind thing. It's they do still have these like key features that make them stand out as... we are the brand that is pushing technology forward.
Yeah.
And I always find that like weirdly juxtaposed against the trade-offs for Sony, because it's the trade-offs that have always kind of turned me off from them and like why I've never bought a Sony camera.
Well, what are those trade-offs?
Well, like, yeah, they have all the high-tech features, but like whenever you're looking at things like the 8-bit color, for instance, until they went to 10-bit. I mean, everyone kind of like complained about the Sony color, like, well, you can fix it or whatever. The 8-bit 420 codecs from Sony just weren't great.
I mean, you've used that, right? You've done some color grading on A7 III footage.
I have. And
not a fun experience.
Just trying to color match it, it falls apart. Where I landed was like, I need to take the A7 III footage and minorly adjust it to look like I want. And then I have to take everything else and match it to that footage because there just isn't enough information. And I always feel like I don't totally understand. I'm kind of getting into a tangent here, but I don't totally understand Sony's codecs. The newer stuff that they're coming out with, they're giving you more options, and like they're expanding those options even with like the latest updates to the A7S III, where like you can shoot in like a high-end XAVC or whatever, and they have options that are like 422 10-bit and that sort of thing. But I just, no matter how hard I try, I don't understand their codecs because anyone else, you look at their stuff, they go, okay, yeah, we're using H.265 or we're using a H.264 to encode our video, and we're going to stick it in a .mov or a .mp4 container, and that's basically it. And like that H.265 is going to be 422 or 420 or 444, whatever it's going to be. But Sony is over here like, well, we have MXF and AVC HD and OXCN and Sony RAW and XAVC, and XAVC has like an S, an SI, and an HS. And you're like, well, what does that mean? They're like, well, XAVC is 4K, and that could be up to like 444, 12-bit if you need it to, but most of the time it's going to be like 422, 10-bit or 420, or blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, well, like, how do I know what's what? I mean, what is XAVC? Is it H.265? And they're like, yeah, well, you can use an H.265 codec, or you could use H.264. It's really an expandable codec, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, so you're not helping me. I don't know what, is it a brand? Are you just like, this is a brand name and it's the same thing as what everybody else is using? It's like the more I dig into, like, somebody explain to me what is it some special codec? Because when I compare a Sony camera, like an A7 III to, a camera from the same generation, say like an XT3 or a GH5 or a EOS R, the Sony version is like, it's going to be long GOP. It's going to cap out at 100 megabits per second, and it's going to be 8-bit. And then I look at and I don't like I'm comparing like 5 or 6 year old cameras, but you go look at the Canon or the Fuji or whatever, and those are like 480 megabit per second. And I'm like, why are the codecs like so much lighter on the Sony if Sony's the lead in the tech industry? Mm-hmm. And I know that with like the modern Sonys, like the A7S III, you can get 400 megabits per second.
Yeah, I mean it has improved a lot, and like the menus are another thing that people just really complained about with old Sonys. And I mean, I've dealt with that frustration a lot of where's this setting? Let me dig through 14 menus to find it, and that's also gotten better, I think, in the newer ones. But it's just between the codecs and the menus, I feel like every time I use a Sony camera, I'm just like, an engineer designed this.
I mean, the menu for selecting the codec is better than the Fuji one, so there is that. At least they're not making you like pick every single choice.
Yeah,
but this is kind of what I mean is that when they say, oh, this is XAVC, I don't understand if that's just some more efficient codec, and that is a 400 megabit per second file out of a Sony FX3 better or than like a 700 megabit per second file out of an XH2S? Am I going to be able to tell the difference? And I feel like I can't get an answer to that question.
Yeah.
And it's like this piece, why either make it clear or, why aren't the codecs and the menus and these sort of things, as they feel like detractors to me when compared to like these premium features where like these are one of a kind features for Sony cameras, and then you can't have like one without the other. It's like you have to either compromise on what you're looking for as far as final output, or compromise on like I need the best autofocus or I need 63 megapixels.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess that's what I mean by like the juxtaposition of the two.
Yeah, but I mean that's and I guess this is like the specific Sony version of a general problem we have in cameras, which is that there's, nothing does all of it perfectly. And
sure.
That's the particular set of trade-offs you get with Sony, but it is frustrating.
I just feel so much like if Sony is the tech leader in camera, it feels like that's what they want us to believe. They want to stand out and say, we make the sensors. We are the most tech forward. Look at this AI chip. We said the words AI before anybody else. Like global shutters. Like, come on, it's all super, super cool. Just, I don't know. Maybe my problem is that I don't need these high data rates. And if I really needed them, I should just shoot like something like ProRes.
Yeah, could be. I don't know. And you and I also don't really have a lot of experience working with footage from newer Sony cameras. So, some of what you're saying is maybe a little bit outdated.
Oh, definitely outdated information. I know the newer Sony cameras, anything newer than like an A7R, an A7 IV or newer, an A7S III, those kind of things are just way, way better. Mm-hmm. They have much better codecs. And a lot of the complaints about, oh, well, Panasonic has all these other cooler video features. Why wouldn't you just use that as a video camera instead of the Sony? I feel like they're finally addressing a lot of that stuff, There has already been some rumors that they're going to add shutter angle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there was like a beta version of some firmware on some Sony camera at NAB where it had shutter angle.
Oh,
And they're like, maybe that's coming.
Yeah.
This FX3.
just add some more settings.
Sure.
It's kind of shocking that the FX3 didn't already have shutter angle.
I know. It's crazy.
That doesn't make sense.
But that's kind of like always been the thing with the Sony mirrorless stuff is it feels like despite having every setting under the sun, they didn't seem to have the settings that you necessarily want or need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like you're always still suffering with, rolling shutter performance, or you don't necessarily have time code, you don't have the waveforms or like these monitor issues. And just, it always felt like there's a bunch of paper cuts with Sony cameras.
Yeah, I agree. And it's always like, I think I said this when we talked about the Burano last week, but it feels like they always push the limits of what you can do, but they almost push it a little bit too far, where they push it so far that all of their features do have, little paper cuts or just like ragged edges of,
right.
Well, if you max this out, then suddenly you can't, use the monitor on the back of the camera, like things like that. And I almost, it's like, it's cool that you can do it, but I almost want them to just pull back just a little bit so that you can have a more cohesive experience that's, easier to understand.
Yeah, like the A7R5 is a really great hybrid video camera, but you really suffer through some rolling shutter for the higher resolution outputs just because the sensor has such a high resolution. And I mean, to their benefit and to their detriment, like, yes, give us all the video features that we possibly can get, and then let us choose the ones we want to use based upon what works best. Like if I have a static shot, I don't care about rolling shutter.
Yeah.
But I think that maybe a more I don't know what the word is. A camera company that maybe cares a little more about their image, might, withhold certain features if, say, like the rolling shutter performance isn't quite there.
Sure.
Or a feature is not really usable for 80% of the use cases, or 80% of the people can't use a feature because it only works under very special conditions. And it feels like Sony isn't holding those back. And
it never really feels to me like Sony is concerned about their cameras being too confusing to use. Like in so many ways, with menus, with feature sets.
I do appreciate that to an extent. I like just being able to have all the things, and I don't necessarily want them to go in and simplify everything down. And so I do think that it is just like everything else at Sony. It's like, wow, this is really great that they do this, but also it's kind of terrible.
I almost want their menus to have like pro mode. You know how like sometimes you use software and there's like an expert mode and unlocks a bunch of settings? Like I almost want their cameras to have that.
Yeah, like you scroll down to the version number and you tap it 10 times, then it unlocks pro mode.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just like an Android phone.
I mean, but really though, it'd be kind of interesting if they did that. Like, you have a simplified mode that doesn't, maybe doesn't push things as far, but just stuff generally works more cohesively. I don't know. It'd be interesting.
Okay, so whenever
I feel like we're ragging on Sony a lot here.
I mean, it's about to get real. That's all this is. It's just us dunking on Sony.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay, to be clear, like I said, to their detriment and to their benefit, I love that Sony pushes the edge. I like that they put everything in their cameras. I think they make some really, really cool stuff. And I just, like, maybe I should buy a Sony camera. Either way, early on in this podcast, and for a while before that, I was pretty adamant that E-mount is probably the best mount to get into for, like, if you're just buying a camera or you don't have a camera before. I was pretty set in my head that, if you don't have a camera and, like, date bodies, Mary lenses, get into E-mount.
And why do you feel that way?
Well, I felt that way just because there was so much more E-mount glass, and this is a couple years ago kind of thing. So much more E-mount glass, and you can adapt most things to E-mount because it's a mirrorless flange, right? You can take your EF lenses to it, and it felt very, very versatile. And it didn't matter if you had an APS-C or a full frame camera; they're the same mount. And as long as you're buying something that has a big enough image circle, or even not, you can put an APS-C lens on a full frame Sony camera and just use the APS-C crop. So it just felt like it was versatile, It had a very wide selection, and Sony was making good lenses and had 30-party support. And so I was like, man, like E-mount's the way to go.
Yeah. I think I remember us talking about that.
Since then, like since having that opinion, I guess, because things change over time, both Z and R mount have become very well filled out, and L mount has gone crazy.
I mean, L mount has basically, not since we started this podcast, but like really in the past couple of years, L mount has really blown up.
Yeah, for sure. And XF has just kind of stayed where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, so I guess my question to you is, do you think that as far as just lens mount ecosystem, do you still think that the edge goes to E-mount, or do you think that there's maybe a more versatile mount for people if they're just looking for something to get into?
Yeah, it's hard to say.
And the other thing that I forgot to mention is like cine cameras.
Yeah.
There's still like, there's cine lenses that are in E-mount,
Mm-hmm.
whereas there's not too many that are in like R-mount. There's like E, EF, and PL, where most of the things that cine lenses would come out in.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. I mean, every red camera supports RF mount.
Well, that's a camera, but I'm talking about lenses.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on what your goals are. I think E-mount wins probably on the lower end because, Sony does have all the APS-C cameras that are E-mount. And so there are at least some options, that are a little bit more affordable, as well as you having the option of, buying a full frame lens to use on an APS-C camera. I mean, I know that, Canon has started coming out with stuff like that, but I still feel like that's a little bit of an advantage maybe for getting into E-mount. And there are still some cameras that support E-mount. So if you buy into if you buy those lenses, like for example, the DJI Ronin 4D, you can use that with E-mount lenses. I think you can use the Inspire drones with E-mount lenses. So, there's some stuff where you can take an E-mount lens and use it, in all these ways. So I think those are advantages to it. But I mean, I don't know. I'm really starting to like L mount. I feel like L mount is advancing quickly. And I feel like if you can get in at a higher level, like if you wanted to start out at full frame, I feel like L mount is probably better at this point than E mount because we're seeing Blackmagic embrace L mount. Obviously, Sigma's making tons of stuff for it. And to me, it just feels like it's newer. I think it's a little bit bigger, so it may avoid some of the image circle problems that E-mount has started running into. And I don't know. I mean, I think they're both good, and E-mount is still probably more established at this point, but I think L-mount may overtake it.
I do think that L-mount is probably in my opinion, most contested as far as if we're just talking about available glass and features and things for a lens mount, which, I mean, how much can you actually talk about a lens mount?
A lot, it turns out.
I do think L mount is highly in contest here as far as who has maybe the most versatile mount. They're basically the same flange distance. So they don't have the shorter flange distance advantage of, Nikon or Canon. But I think that where maybe E-mount still has some advantage is they have more small lens options available.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually definitely helpful if you're looking for something with a small body.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Sony's bodies are just smaller.
Well,
or if you're getting into like the A7 RC.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say kind of, it goes hand in hand with the lens ecosystem, but not exactly the same. I feel like one huge advantage of Sony is that if you decide to get a Sony camera and be a Sony bro and understand how to use Sony menus and buy E-mount lenses, you have such a huge selection of cameras to choose from that are all going to mostly work the same way, but all have different trade-offs in terms of like size and capability and price and stuff. Right. And I mean, it's like nobody can match all these cameras that Sony has come out with. And part of that is that they do have a lot of, APS-C bodies, like smaller, more affordable cameras. And so therefore, there are more E-mount lenses that are appropriate for cameras in that size as compared to some of these other systems.
Definitely. And we're going to get a little bit into their camera lines. And I'm curious if you think that they have too many camera lines or not enough camera lines. I feel like they could add like 2 more. But one last thing on E-mount is you mentioned the limitations of the image circle. It seems like the E mount was originally designed around an APS-C size sensor. I think that's the way that story goes. And they crammed a full frame sensor into it. And so for as far as like image circle diameter, E mount is fairly small, and there just isn't a lot of room to move that sensor around
for IBIS.
for internal image stabilization. And I mean, Sony is really working their way around this whole thing as like you can take the gyro data out of your Sony camera and then stabilize it in post, because it feels like they've basically hit the limit as far as how many stops of stabilization they can really do within the constraints of the image circle of the lens.
At some point, you'd start cropping in on the lens, on the sensor.
Yeah, and that's just going to be a limitation forever for Sony for E mount unless they do something else. And I don't think it's too bad of a problem, but I mean, Panasonic with their L mount, the huge image circle, they can do all this crazy stabilization, and they have a less difficult engineering problem than Sony.
You always have this happen whenever, basically when you're the first one to a certain idea. I mean, Sony developed that mount, I assume, before L mount was developed. And so it's like L mount was able to kind of learn some of those mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the advantage to L mount is that it came after E, R, and Z and was able to learn from a lot of those things and make a very mature choice on most of the the things around what that mount looks like.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah, so let's I have the next thing on here is phone sensors. We can talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about their camera lines
for the next hour and a half, because there are so many of them.
Okay, so they have the A1 line. I mean, do you want to dig into each of these as we go? I think we'd do that. Okay, so they have A1, which is what, like 2 years old?
Something like that, yeah. And it was, it was, and maybe still would seem to be their highest end line, sort of, maybe. Just confusing.
It's confusing, right? That's their like fast pro camera. Oh no, because the A9 III still has the global, so that's even faster. It felt like when the A1 came out, it was like, this is like the craziest, best thing we can do. And it's still crazy best in a lot of ways.
I mean, that's the one that Gerald compared against the Burano.
Right.
And mostly felt that the A1 was, in terms of image quality, mostly felt that it was either competitive or better.
Which, hot take.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm just saying, like, it's punching in that class.
It is.
Actually.
Yeah, it is. I think that there are some other cameras in Sony's line that are starting to step on the toes of the A1. I think that it would have been and would be cool to start seeing that stack sensor technology work its way down. I think that we still stand to see stack sensor in things before we start seeing more global shutters in things.
It's possible.
Well, like, to be determined.
Yeah.
So do you think we're going to get an A1 Mark II this year?
It's just so hard to say, because the A9 III, which I assume we'll talk about in a moment, like that's the camera that makes me not understand the A1 anymore. But I mean, you would think, right? You would think they would update it. It seems like the A1 is still a flagship series camera. I don't know. There
is some rumor that maybe late this year we could see an A1 Mark II. I don't know what they would do to that camera.
It feels a little early, maybe, if the A1's only 2 years old. I don't know. Is that the age?
Is it only 2 years old? It came out right before the Z9, which was 2021. So maybe.
Okay, so it's a little bit older than that. Then.
Yeah, 2021. So it's 3 years old.
Okay, so I mean, I think that's like right at the beginning of when they could update it.
Right. Yes, it's just right at the very beginning. I don't think we see an A1 Mark II this year. I think there's going to be too much other stuff happening. But I think that it's definitely something for next year.
Yeah.
I'm mostly curious where that goes. Because it seems like that's where they want to pioneer, sensor technology, even though it doesn't have the global sensor.
Yeah.
A9 III.
Yeah. Now that one was announced last fall.
Right.
And then it came out in like February of this year. And that camera made a big splash.
Yeah. I thought that they were just giving up on the A9 line. I mean, the A9 line has always been like their fast sports camera.
Yeah.
What's the fastest lens, fastest thing that we can shoot? And the A9 II came out in like 2019, like October 2019. It's 5 years between the
Yeah.
A9 II and the A9 III, and most of Sony's cameras surpassed it in a lot of ways and a lot of capabilities. And so I thought, like, oh, there's the A7 line, there's the A9 line. A9 is obviously like the more premium camera option, but maybe they don't do that anymore. And the A7R5 is their premium camera now. But I think that's still not the case. And Sony still sees the A9 as, some camera companies will put an S on something for speed. I think the 9 is basically that.
Yeah.
It's their fast camera.
I mean,
it's their sports camera.
Yeah, it makes sense to put a global shutter in that, but I was still surprised that camera wasn't the A1 Mark II, just because it seems like the technology leader type position.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It seems to me that if they had switched roles, if the A9 III was the A1, and which would have been early for it in 2021, and then the A1 is what the A9 III is now, that would make the most sense.
Yeah.
But Sony's name lineup is always fraught.
Yes.
Do you think that there's any reason someone would buy an A1 over an A9 III now?
Well, I mean, I don't remember all the details between the two cameras, so it's hard for me to completely say, but I mean, I think the downside of the global shutter is that the noise is a little bit worse than other sensors. And so maybe that would be the one case if you cared more about image quality than speed, maybe then you go with the A1.
Yeah, I guess that and resolution, right? It's just going to be more so.
Yeah.
I think that the A9 III is like, what, 26 or 30 megapixels?
Yeah. So, I mean, the two cameras for different purposes. And honestly, I think, especially for video, I think rolling shutter is a little overblown as an issue. I'm not saying it's not an issue, but it just, for a lot of what people film, I just don't think it matters that much. And so if you wanted to, if you're getting a hybrid camera that you're largely going to use for filming, I think for a lot of people, the A1 is probably a better choice, unless their filming is like F1 races or sports or something.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, A7R5.
High resolution photos.
Right. I don't know. I mean, the line kind of makes sense, right? The A9 1, A9 2, and
yeah, those are a little confusing.
As you get into the rest of it, like the A7R5, or the A7R, the A7, and the A7S, those make total sense.
I agree.
The A7S, I think that Sony recently said that that's a photo camera, and the FX3 is the video camera.
That's weird.
I don't understand who's shooting. Maybe there's people who shoot low light photos, like a lot of 12 megapixel low light photos.
I really don't at this point. Like, as soon as the FX3 came out, I felt like the the A7S3 didn't really make sense anymore.
I mean, maybe you need a viewfinder.
I guess. I mean, I'm not saying that's not useful, but I don't know. Just those cameras feel very similar to me.
Yeah, they're basically the same camera. And it seems like the FX3 is getting pushed more into the cine world with like the feature updates and that sort of thing. They're keeping them fairly in parity, but I do think like if you're looking for a video camera for Sony, like it seems like the FX3 is what you buy over the A7S3.
Yeah. I guess I like that you have the option. I mean, if, for example, like I shoot on Fuji, if Fuji had like an FX3 variant of the X-H2S, I'd be into that. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah,
but,
that makes sense.
Like the A7S3 isn't as good of a photo camera anyway because it's so low resolution. So,
it's low resolution, but it does give you the option. Like it's not taking it away. You're not having to use the viewfinder.
Sure.
The FX3 shoots photos?
It probably does, but it doesn't have a mechanical shutter, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's gone too. So they were like the A7R5 is fairly new, 2 years, something like that. The A7S3 is pretty old.
Yeah, that camera is old.
That's getting old. And the A7 IV is getting fairly old.
It is. Yeah, and the A7 IV, it was a pretty well respected camera. But then I feel like the A7C2 came out and it's basically better, isn't it?
It's almost the same in most ways. They added a lot of features from the A7R5 into the A7C2.
I think they may have added some stuff from the ZV-1 too.
And some of the ZV-1 features. And so it's like it has stuff that the A7 IV doesn't. I think that maybe it's a little compromised on some like heat dissipation, but otherwise it's essentially the same camera for cheaper.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's what it is. It's the same camera, but cheaper.
Right.
And if you look at their history, it's not surprising to me that they haven't updated the A7S III because, I mean, for so long, the A7S II was out and there were rumors for like years about the A7S III, and it took them a really long time to update that. So that just kind of made me feel like that camera seems like it's less important to them. But the A7 IV, I feel like, is due for an update because A7 III, A7 IV, like they've generally kept a pretty good cadence on those, and those cameras are hugely popular.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like maybe the main difference here for like an A7 IV versus like an A7C II is like you get a fully mechanical shutter, like a better EVF, and like it has like different controls, like a joystick, dual SD card slots, well, the SD plus CFA slots.
Okay.
And so like you get a little more, like it's kind of like the difference between like an R8 and R6.
Mm-hmm.
Almost exactly that difference. Just more controls, more premium features. But to me, the A7 series is kind of Sony's most important camera. Not like the A7R5 or A7R and the A7S, but just like the straight up vanilla A7 is their $2,000 to $2,500 consumer facing hybrid mirrorless camera that if you don't want to compromise too far into video or too far into photo, you end up somewhere in the middle and you buy a $2,000 A7 blank.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I mean, there was a time when I had considered buying an A7 III when I was looking for cameras.
I strongly considered buying an A7 III whenever I was looking at buying my XT3.
Yep.
And I ultimately ended up on like, I'm going to save $200 and I'm going to get more video features.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I went Fuji.
Yeah.
And that just reshaped my entire life.
It kind of did.
I mean, can you imagine if I got into Sony?
You'd be a totally different person.
Think about how many email lenses I would have right now.
I can't imagine.
It would be so many. It would just be so many email lenses. Well, they would be more expensive. Well, not really. I probably would own some Sigma lenses. Anyways, the A7 IV came out when? 2021.
Okay.
So it's not like that old.
It's not that old, but it feels like they probably need to update it this year or next year.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that they're going to come out with a new A7S first, or do you think that they're going to come out with an A7 V first?
Honestly, I think they'll come out with an A7 V first.
Really?
Yeah.
It seems like they released the R, and then they release the vanilla, and then they release the S. And they still haven't released the A7S IV.
Yeah, but I mean, the same thing happened with the A7S III.
That did come out after the A7 IV, didn't it?
I think it did.
Yeah.
Or at least around the same time. Like, I mean, that camera felt overdue. And now that they have the FX series, I don't know. It could be a while.
What if they came out with like an A7S IV that had a stack sensor, like a 12 megapixel stack sensor?
That'd be interesting.
I would like to see that camera push into higher resolution. I know that, the pixel size is kind of a big reason for the low light, but it also seems like just the way that they tune the sensors is the main thing. It's like if they set that higher gain at that 12,800 because the dual gain sensor, and they just put that cap so high that's what really gives them the ability to have that super low noise at super high ISO. And it would be cool to see them do that in something that is more of a 6K resolution.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I think that camera would be pretty cool at like 26 megapixels, give or take, because that could get you into like a 6K, or you could do more of like the electronic stabilization, and 1.1 crop on an A7S III, you're inside of 4K at that point.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it makes sense as the updated version of the A7S IV. I just don't know when that's going to happen.
Right. So just later. Okay, let me kind of run through the rest of their lineup. They had the C line. They added the high resolution C line. They have their APS-C line, which is the 6700.
Yeah, they used to have so many of those, and now it's just really just the one.
It's basically it. I think that they still sell all of those cameras.
Yeah, which
I think
you
they still
probably
sell the A6400.
probably shouldn't buy that camera.
Like the sheer number of cameras that Sony has for sale is insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a list of 6, 7, 8 alpha cameras here, and that's not all of their alpha cameras because you can still buy like previous generations of essentially all of these. And so while, of these 8, like any of these 8 are great cameras to buy. Like you go about and buy them today, you're gonna be super happy with them. It's weird that they still sell like the previous version of all of these. And so in reality, they have like 16 or more Alpha series cameras that are for sale.
That's where the Apple comparisons come out. Tim Cook era Apple. They're like, we'll sell this camera until nobody wants to buy one.
Yep. And then they have their Z line, which is like their vlogger line, I guess.
Yeah, it kind of feels like their content creator focused camera.
Yeah, and they have like the APS-C version, the fixed lens version, and then the A7S3
which
version.
Which is the really cool one. Is it the ZVE one?
Yeah, the ZV1.
Just the one?
No, maybe it is ZVE1, and there's the ZVE10 is the other one.
Yeah, because the ZVE one's the one that first added all those AI cropping and tracking features, and that's pretty cool.
I still would like one of those cameras in white. I think of like a tiny little shoot everything video camera that's like super, super good in most situations. I think of that camera.
A camera like that is, I feel like, Sony at its best, where they were the first one to some of these AI things and used it in ways that are legitimately useful and legitimately seem cool. And they made a product that, isn't for everybody, but is for a specific use case and, achieves that really well.
Do you think that they're missing anything in their lineup? I mean, I'm looking at 11 cameras here that are in like their mirrorless or hybrid mirrorless world. Do you think that they basically have covered the market?
It sure seems like it to me. I mean, I don't know what I would really say they're missing.
Yeah, I'm kind of hard pressed as well. I don't think that they don't have a low end like APS-C camera underneath the A6700. Yes, they have like the ZVEs, but those aren't really like photo cameras. It seems like they don't have a sub $1,000 like has an eyepiece photo camera.
Yeah, I wonder why they haven't updated those. Maybe it's just not economical to sell cameras in that range, but yeah, it does kind of stand out because like when you and me were first getting into mirrorless cameras, we didn't want to spend that much money. We were both kind of looking in like the $500 range, and they don't have anything even close to that now.
I don't know if they've ever had anything like that. I mean, they had the 6,000, but that was $800 back then.
Well, even $800 though, I feel like they don't.
Yeah,
they don't have any modern cameras in that range that are for photos.
Right, you can take photos with like a ZV-E10. Maybe they want all those people to buy like a Cybershot.
Yeah, there you go. Or an Xperia.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's basically also $1,000. Okay, let's talk about a little bit about their point and shoots, specifically the RX1R.
Oh, here you go again. You want a new version of that camera so bad.
I want them to take the sensor from the A7R5. I want them to stick it into a compact fixed lens point and shoot.
You would buy that camera so fast.
No, I wouldn't, because it would cost $4,000.
Yeah, it would.
And I would just be like, there's no way I'm going to spend $4,000 on that camera. But it's been like 2015 since the RX1R came out.
Maybe for its 10-year anniversary, they'll come out with a new one.
Oh, man, can you imagine? I feel like with all the buzz around these like premium point and shoots, it's so weird to me that Sony hasn't just thrown a camera at it. I mean, they're not as bad as Samsung as far as just like making a billion products. But it seems like Sony would not shy away from just making another camera.
And they already, kind of in their DNA, they make compact cameras. So it does seem like it wouldn't be that hard for them.
I think everything kind of died off for those point and shoots like 5 or 6 years ago. And it's just taken forever to ramp that back up because, these camera companies thought that demand was dead. And it just turns out it wasn't. And I mean, even the RX100, I mean, what was the last RX100 that came out?
I feel like that's been a while too, although they have had a lot of them. I mean, there's like what does it go to? Like the Mark 6 or Mark 7?
I think it's the Mark 7.
Yeah. But I think that was a ways back. It wasn't anytime recently.
2019 was the last RX100. That was $1,200.
I was going to say, I mean, the problem I think the RX 100 had was that it was just a little too expensive for its capability. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't better than a phone camera, but it's got to be quite a bit better to justify that price.
I mean, I think that in 2019 it was probably that much better. And if you have a camera that has a pop-up electronic viewfinder, you can charge whatever you want.
I don't know about that. It's like a 1-inch sensor, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's like a 1-inch sensor with a zoom. It wasn't enormous.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I can see a use case for it. Like having the zoom is nice, but it's just, I don't know. I never felt like that camera justified its price personally.
I still want to see Sony bring those lines back.
Yeah.
Maybe they just didn't sell. Maybe they have too many cameras. I don't know. I can see a world where like the RX 100 and the RX 1 and the RX 1R come back and people actually want them.
Yeah.
I guess they probably need some sort of gimmick in order to make them work, because that's really where these things hit. You know, you have to have a like a ProMIS filter, that you can just like flip on and off like the GR cameras.
Have some lights inside that emulate light leak.
That's what I'm thinking. Maybe they roll out like film simulations, but call it something else, like cyber looks. I don't know.
Honestly, they should figure out a way to make some of their AI stuff cheap enough to put in a camera like that.
Maybe they bring back. I mean, yeah, I think that would be huge. You know, if they leaned on their AI features and the autofocus and all the things that make the Sonys really special, as far as just these interesting capabilities, that's probably where it would sell. But I think that what is appealing to like that point and shoot market is like, it's the vibes, Daniel. It's not the tech.
You're just chasing that vibe cam.
Yep, you got to like that's what you're looking for. And so I think that, you know, the features are what sell like the ZV and the ZVE series, and that's where that stuff goes. But they need something else for the RX series that really sells it. Yeah. They should bring back like the Minolta brand or something.
Oh man, I don't even know what you would do if they released a new RX 1R, but it was Minolta branded.
What if that was the model name? It was like the Sony Minolta.
Oh man, you'd love that.
That'd be weird. And they call it Minolta 1.
You'd love that so much.
I mean, pretty cool. Pretty cool. And that could be like their film line series, and like it has a hardware switch on it where you can turn up how much fake grain that it creates.
If anybody was gonna, release a new camera line just to have a gimmick like that, it would be Sony.
I would hope so.
They seem not afraid of having new camera lines.
What other things do you think that they could do that would really make this thing sell? Besides the hardware dial for grain.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I can top that.
Yeah, nothing.
No, I think that's I think that's the peak.
I mean, the Fuji, what was it? The Instax 100 had that feature where you could add like physical vignetting.
But like, maybe they could do that, but like with other shapes.
Oh, that's good.
Like a heart.
Yeah, it's real good. Yeah. The lens that I gave to my cousin a couple weeks ago it was one of those lenses that has like the cross of lines in it to create like star patterns for like highlights. What if it just had those built in somehow? Like you could like switch through like fake anamorphic.
I don't know about that.
Make it weird. Put a flash on it that's like 3 times more powerful than it has to be.
That way you can make all your pictures look like they're from the like mid-90s.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that would be perfect. If you could shoot with a flash, grain turned to maximum, and you had that star pattern thing or like an X pattern that like makes all the light, it would look crazy.
Really justifying that $3,000 price for this camera.
Yep, and then with the pop-up EVF.
Yes, of course.
So that's what I want. That's my wish list for the new Sony Minolta 1. Okay, I mean that's most of their camera lines. I think we've kind of covered most of the rumors here as well. I mean, it's just kind of just general rumor of like, we know that they have to update the A7S series. We know they have to update the A7 series.
Mm-hmm.
These are probably coming soon. And that's kind of like basically it. I haven't even seen too much like rumors of what those are going to look like. I think we're all kind of floored whenever the global sensor came out.
Yeah, it's like, what are they going to do next to top that?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just wait and see, I guess.
Mm-hmm. It's funny with Sony that they release stuff so often that I don't really feel like I have a good handle on when to expect things from them. It just feels like at any moment they could drop a new camera.
Yeah, or a lens.
Yep, or a lens.
Never drop lenses.
No, that's a bad idea.
All right, is there anything else that we're missing here? Like, what is there anything else that you want to see out of Sony? Anything that we didn't cover?
Well, I mean, we talked about the Burano last week, which, a lot of mixed feelings there. I guess just to mention, I do think it's interesting and cool that Sony has the higher end FX cameras. I mean, Canon's the only other company I can think of that really plays in that space of having, let's say like $5,000 to $10,000 more professional video cameras, because like Panasonic is the one you would think would do that, and they don't really have anything like that. Fuji doesn't. As much as they would like you to think their GFX 100, the Deuce is, it's not.
It's like the red low end, and it is you said, like you mentioned, there's Canon, and then there's the Sony, and that's basically it in that range.
And I think like
the Blackmagic, that was what I was thinking of.
I think the FX6 and FX9 are pretty popular for people that are doing, paid work, doing documentary style things, that sort of deal. And I think it's kind of part of how Sony's huge lineup does make them appealing for a user to get into, because you have a growth path. Like you can start off buying an A6700, or maybe you start with an A7 IV, and then, I'm getting more into video. Like you could buy an FX3, you could buy an FX6. Like it's just cool that you have all these higher options. Like for me as a Fuji fan, even if I was willing to spend $5,000 or $6,000 on a video camera, there's nothing I can buy and still be in the same ecosystem, use the same lenses, familiar menus, that sort of thing. And Sony does have that path. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, there is a fairly consistent way forward for Sony, which is like super interesting. There is rumor that there's going to be an FX6 II this year. And I definitely agree with you of like these lower end, like cinema-ish cameras. The FX series is like the FX9 and the FX6 are very good and compete very well in that category. And like the FX6 rumors, I mean, they're rumored to have like 4:2 10-bit, like 600 megabits per second, full frame, like good autofocus, like 4K 10 megapixels HAL sensors. So, a good like 4K camera with like decent codecs. But I mean, if you're shooting in Sony's world and you're dealing with like XAVC, and you know what those files look like, and you know how to work with them, and you've been shooting on like your A7S III, it's an easy step up into an FX3, because it's just like, here's the same type of files, but maybe like you can push them around a little more. And it seems like they have a pretty, and like you're still working within like S-Log3 and S-Cine gamut, and you're kind of all in the same like world of color profiles. And even if you move into like XOCN, when you're not quite to the raw stuff that you're going to get out of the Venice, they still have like, here's another stepping stone where the footage still acts like you would expect it to. It has more better options within all of our weird codec lines.
Yeah, it's like some of that stuff's the same, but you get a more pro body, more pro features. So I think it's a cool upgrade path.
Yeah, I do think that maybe it's not so, if you're making the jump from shooting like log to shooting in raw, like that may be enough of a learning curve and enough flexibility that it kind of doesn't matter where you're coming from. But I do think Sony tries really hard to make it familiar on the way up if you're kind of becoming a budding filmmaker.
Yeah. Well, and I just think having something in that price range is a valuable spot, because I mean, I'm personally not at the point that I want to spend $15,000 on a cinema camera, but it's like I could imagine a world where I spend $6,000 on one. And, at least sooner. And, it's just neat that they have options in that range.
I mean, it seems like if you had a $6,000, you'd probably be better off buying 2 Blackmagic Pixies. I know I said it wrong.
Yes.
I don't care.
Yeah. Well, we may have to talk about that one more next week.
Maybe.
There's a lot of Sony stuff, Lucas.
Yeah. There was something else I was going to mention about it. It's like we kind of touched on the Burano. We kind of touched on the FX. The Venice is super, super cool. Really great high end. I don't know what else to say. Like, there's nothing really else that I want to see from Sony. I want them to keep pushing everybody. I want them to keep biting on the heels of Canon and keep pulling market share from Canon, so that Canon has to make better stuff and everyone keeps competing. I want to see them stick more dumb AI features and things. I want to see better autofocus, and I want to keep seeing them, put the high watermark on camera tech.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're doing all those things, which is good. I think stuff that they're not doing that they should be doing. I mean, one would just be kind of overall software quality. I mean, the improved menus were a good step in the right direction, but we talked earlier about all those rough edges. I'd like to see them smooth more of that stuff out and document things better, make things more easily understandable, and kind of along with that, more firmware updates for their cameras. I mean, it seems like maybe they're doing a little better with that now. They recently announced a pretty big one coming to some of their cameras, but it's been a problem for a long time with Sony that you buy a camera and then it just doesn't get firmware updates. And they come out with a new camera that, is like lower end, but has features that you want in your more expensive camera, and then they just don't release firmware for it.
Yep.
And I think with their status as being like a technology leader and having all these features, I think they've got to be supporting that with software, even for existing customers. And that's something that they could improve that like would make everybody happy.
I definitely agree. Seeing some improvement on the software side for Sony, just across the board, update support, and just interface would be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that comes to mind is maybe ergonomics. I think that they've been slowly making that better, but generally speaking, like the ergonomics of their camera isn't class leading.
I mean, some of that I think is because they go for the small size, but for me, that was one of the biggest reasons I was glad I didn't get an A7 III over my GH5, just because holding the camera was just so unpleasant compared to the GH5.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess, we've talked a lot about things we don't like about Sony. We've talked a lot of good things about Sony. I mean, do you think they're a viable, like, are they something you would recommend to people in 2024?
I think yes, absolutely. I think it's hard not to recommend Sony. I think that there's so much, whenever you start getting into, especially if hybrid video, but you start getting into the camera world, there's so much in your face about Sony. Like, so many people shoot Sony, and they have like really good professional lines, and they have decent like consumer grade lines, and there's like, they basically have everything you need from your FX30 student film project all the way up to your Venice to Hollywood production.
Yeah.
And it feels like you can just get into the Sony ecosystem and then just live there and be happy. And you're never going to be waiting too long for them to come out with something new that you want, because they release lenses every 30 days.
There's no risk that they're going to stop investing in camera stuff. Like, it seems like they've got a lot of money to throw at it, and they're constantly coming out with new things.
It seems like they want to be number one in that market, and they are trying their darndest to do it. So, like, there are a few caveats to some Sony stuff. Like, for a while there, I was saying, buy a Sony, but like, don't buy a used. If you're shooting video and you care about color grading, like, don't buy an 8-bit Sony, which was anything that was older than the A7 IV, sorry. And I still basically stand by that, but also most people are just going to shoot Rec 709 profile and be happy with it.
Or shoot log and then just post the log.
Yeah, I mean, actually that's more likely what's going to happen. So, I mean, it just kind of depends on what you're looking for. So yeah. I would definitely recommend Sony. I think their A7 like C and CR are really cool, fun cameras. If someone's like, I just want like a compact high res, and if they're looking for the best autofocus, it's all there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that even though you and I don't shoot them, they're an absolute powerhouse of a camera company. And, I think they have gotten to that second place position like I think it was well earned that they've gotten to that position, because they do have a lot of good stuff. And anytime you have a lot of good stuff, you're going to have some problems. And so that's, some of what we've talked about. But yeah, it'd be hard to not consider them, if you're just getting into cameras now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the big three, right? You have your Nikon and your Sony and your Canon just really contesting for so much of that full frame market share.
Yeah.
Where do you see things going? Canon came out pretty clearly saying that they want to have overwhelming market share in the mirrorless market. Like, that's their super ambitious goal. And it seems like Sony is not going to let them do that without a fight.
Yeah.
And it seems that Nikon is also becoming quite serious about it with like the purchase of Red and the release of some pretty competitive cameras and pretty good lenses lately. So Like, how do you see those three kind of that market shaking out? Do you think that, it's really going to come down to just Sony and Canon as a duopoly? Do you think that those market shares are going to even out? What?
It's hard to say. I honestly think that there's not going to be one clear winner. I don't think Canon's going to just, have the overwhelming dominant market share. I think Sony's not going to let that happen. Nikon, I feel like, is maybe the one that would be at the most risk between those three, but even them, it's a big company and they've held on this long. So I kind of think it's going to continue the way it is. I think all three of these companies want to own that space. I think they do all have fans. And I mean, I think they each have enough momentum that they can probably maintain, a fairly strong position.
I would say that it's one of my favorite things about like the camera gear world is, there's a lot of vertical integration between like lenses and cameras, and like you have to buy the lenses for your camera and that sort of thing. But there's not like a camera operating system. I mean, there is, but like every camera has its own manufacturer operating system because it is a utility tool. You don't need like a custom OS that like runs apps and has this whole other market to it. And it feels like because none of these companies have to be dependent upon like one thing except for Sony's sensors, they can all exist within this ecosystem and just like compete like crazy. And I think it's really, really cool that, as so much of tech, it ends up where it's like, well, you have to buy like, Windows or Mac OS, or you have to buy an Apple or an Android or whatever. And in the camera world, it's like all the options are good.
Yeah.
Most of the options are good.
And even the smaller companies can still make good cameras that are competitive against bigger companies' cameras.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I like a lot about camera gear, is it feels like what like an electronics market could look like if there is really healthy competition. And seeing, Sony, Nikon, Canon, all these companies really contest over market share is cool, because it means that we get a lot better cameras and a lot cooler cameras.
Yeah. I think that has pushed things forward. Sony releasing the A9 III with that global sensor is going to push the others to, keep improving their technology. And we win. So.
I would say that, it seems like if Sony hadn't, I mean, maybe not, but it seems like in the absence of Sony in the teens, like 2010 to 2020, maybe Canon would have dominated the market share, and like Nikon would have been too slow and like stuck in DSLR world, and most of the things that maybe would have pushed Canon. I think that Sony stepping into that market when they did really helped solidify a lot of that competition, and it really has pushed Canon to have to be a better camera company.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. So like the opposing force to Canon.
Yep. I feel like Canon's red and like Sony's blue.
But not red like Red the camera brand, because that's Nikon.
Yeah. Well, I guess they all have their own colors. Like Nikon's yellow.
But Nikon's also red.
No, well, yeah, that's confusing.
Yeah. And Canon's red. Canon's colors are red.
But Nikon's red.
Yeah. But the little ring around Sony Alpha cameras is orange, which is also, adjacent to red.
Is Sony orange or is Sony blue?
I mean,
they're orange.
If we're talking about their logo, it's it's kind of orange.
I guess they are orange. Yeah. Who's blue? Is Olympus blue?
Maybe Olympus is blue.
Fuji's green.
I don't know. This color thing's too confusing.
Oh, geez.
Everybody's talking about those Canon colors, but when it comes down to it, I don't know what color any of these camera companies are.
Just kill it, Daniel. Kill it. Get us out of here.
That's it for the show today. Thanks for joining us, and if you liked it, tell a friend so they can check it out too. You can find out more about the show at www.cameragearpodcast.com, and you can find us on Twitter @CameraGearPod. We'll be back with more next week.